I have been lucky enough to speak with people from all walks of life and many spiritual backgrounds. I have also looked into world cultures and the religions that follow them. And one commonality that I found to be nearly universal is a love and respect for our ancestors who came before us. Sadly, the veneration of ancestors is something that has begun to take a back seat in our global culture. That is why in this video, I want to share with you how to honor and venerate your ancestors. So I'm going to do this video a little bit differently. Normally I talk about my videos from a Norse Pagan Germanic perspective, but in this one I want to talk about not just a paganism perspective, but a global perspective, because ancestral veneration is something that we as humans all have collectively sought after, and even religions that you wouldn't expect it, such as Christianity and especially Baptist or Protestant Christianity, they do still do some form of ancestral veneration that most likely come from pagan past, or at least our human evolution as a species. So the first thing you can do to actually bring back your ancestors, to honor and venerate them, no matter who you are, is to simply to talk about them. This is something I've been exploring more with my personal family. I've been talking more with my grandfather because he knows he doesn't have much time left. We've kind of had that conversation, and I've really made it my mission and my goal to learn more about the family I don't know about. So I've actually been asking him questions. I mean, you know, normally the elders in your family will tell you about the past, but you kind of tune out, you turn off the lights a little bit and act like you're listening because you've heard these stories before. But now I'm taking a more active role. I'm writing things down. I'm writing names down. I'm encouraging him to dig up those old family photos so I have them, I can digitize them and save them. And that way I know if something happens, I know where they are, I know who they are, because a lot of the times we wouldn't know who they are if he wasn't there to tell me. And recently he actually pulled up a picture of my great-great-grandfather Frank and his wife Alice, which was really exciting. And especially since if you cover my great-great-grandfather's like mouth, we have like the same eyes, and that's crazy. And if you cover like my father's and my grandfather's mouths, we all have the same eyes, and that's wild. So it was really cool to see this photo, and now I know. I didn't know his name until a couple of years ago because he never said it. He just said my grandfather, and so I didn't know, and now I know about my great-great-grandfather Frank. And so as a pagan, does that mean I'm going to sit down and, call out to Frank and say, Frank, he was a Christian, in the Christian heaven? No, I'm not going to talk about him in a pagan context. But what I can tell you now is this is my grandfather, Frank. He was raised in Kentucky through and through by his family, several generations removed away from their European roots. He opened up a farm, tobacco farm, and was really well known until it was flooded away by a big flood because it existed between two streams. And then he opened a general store, and him and his wife Alice were very known for having big parties because they were the first ones in the town to own a radio, and so everyone would come over and listen to the radio and and drink and eat and all those things. So I know this about him now, and I didn't know about that before, and now I've shared it with you. That's ancestral veneration. And so I think if we all got together and we started recording more, especially in our modern age, and writing things down, recording it, and remembering those ancestors who otherwise would be forgotten by my children, especially their children's children. All of us, no matter who you are, no matter where your ancestors come from, have stories of heroes, of great people, of boring people, of villains. I mean, I know of like a criminal in my family that was like a part of like this whole, coal mine fiasco where, they were trying to like steal the coal and there was a strike and he maybe killed an officer or something like that. I don't know. But I also know the story of my great-great uncle who died in a coal mine out eastern Kentucky. In fact, it was the worst coal mine disaster in eastern Kentucky. I know that now. And I didn't know that before, and that's important. So the view in this shot right here is not what's important. It's what I am sitting on here that I want to start this little bit of a conversation on. I am sitting on top of a mausoleum right now, and the reason I'm doing that is because this is very mound shape. And I want to talk a little bit about the Germanic and Pagan and Celtic knowledge that we have, most of which comes from the book that I love, which is Myths and Symbols in Pagan Europe. Seriously, if you watch this channel a lot and you haven't bought this book, buy it. It's one of the most influential books in my practice. It's really what really got me into this faith, and it's an amazing resource, especially about ancestral veneration. It covers both the Celtic, the Germanic, and the Scandinavian perspective, all about their religious practices and what they did. Now, one of the things that was known throughout Germanic, Celtic, and Scandinavian practices was mound building and burying people in mounds. And what was known about this is actually a lot of council meetings or, religious events would be held on these burial mounds to honor and venerate the memory of the people buried there. This is something we still see in Scandinavia today. Many pagan events happen at burial mounds. And even here in North America, while not the same, Native American people had burial mounds. In fact, there's burial mounds all across Ohio and Kentucky and much of the Northeast and much of the United States. And they're still considered sacred to the tribes today. Now, one practice going back to the Celtic in particular, which was very strange. So they really saw like heads as important. So a lot of times they would collect the heads of their enemies to harness their power in some way, even using them in fertility rituals. It's real weird, and this is definitely like the dark side of ancestral veneration that I'm glad we've evolved from, or at least I very hopefully have evolved from, but definitely very strange and just an interesting part of history. So yes, ancestral veneration was important to the Germanic, Celtic, and Scandinavian people, as well as the Native American people and cultures from around the world. I mean, it's really fascinating to see how many cultures have some form of ancestral veneration, including the cultures you might not expect, as I mentioned before. Christianity, Protestant Christianity especially, it's crazy. I mean, again, everyone here in the Lexington graveyard, for the most part, was most likely some form of Protestant Christian. There's probably a few Catholics buried here, but you walk around this graveyard and what do you see? You see flowers on the graves. You see candles. You see gifts. These are offerings, people. If you're offering things to the dead, you are practicing in some form of paganism. This is not what I would call a Christian practice. I mean, you're literally giving items to the dead, which is something that is a human cultural tradition at this point, but also very steeped in pagan practices from around the world. Oh, look what I found. Perfect examples of what used to be pagan traditions, as people have left money around the statue of who I assume is Mary? I would assume, which is basically just ancient goddess worship transitioned over to Christianity. But that's besides the point. I just think it's really cool when you see stuff like this where people are leaving offerings for the dead or for a deity. You're pagan. You're practicing pagan things. But with that, thank you so much for joining me for this video so far. We're nearly at the end here, and I hope this information has been helpful for you. And if you're enjoying the content here at the Wisdom of Odin, please think about supporting me on Patreon. I have a lot of really great benefits there, including our community Discord, community live streams, early access videos, and my book supporters club, where you learn about that book I'm writing, which has to do with ancestors to some degree. Otherwise, thank you so very much. And now back to the video. Pagan. Another thing we can look at specifically in the Scandinavian is the naming of people, which again is something passed down throughout human species and generations and cultures. So as far as the Scandinavian though, a lot of the times the last name was based on the first name of your father and then son or daughter. And this is not something specifically unique to Scandinavia, but it's the best example I have, and obviously coming at this as a Norse pagan. But if your father's name was Sigurd, you would make your last name Sigurdsson. And then let's say your name was Bjorn. I'm going with very specific classic names here. So your name would be Bjorn Sigurdsson, and then you would have a daughter named Freya. And then you would say her name is Freya Bjornsdottir. And that continued for generations until eventually Christianity came in and kind of started removing this, and a lot of those names became solidified. And that's why a lot of people, specifically in Minnesota, let's say their father's name was Eric and the Erickson, and then they removed that. Their last name is now Erickson. So Erickson is just a popular last name there because it's been solidified. This is something that I'm hoping to bring back personally with myself. Now, sadly, again, my name is Jacob, and so my child, if I have a son, their name would be Jacobson. Sorry, kids, but, I'm naming you something cooler so you don't get stuck with Jacob. But just in general, the idea of a name carrying some specific value with that next generation is something, again, shared by all of humanity. And that's why you see a lot of people in America today, or at least in the early 1900s, go by, again, my great-great-grandfather, his name was Frank. His son's name was Frank Jr. And so if I wanted to honor his memory, I could name my son Frank. I'm not doing that, but because Frank, I mean, come on. But yeah, in conclusion of that segment, naming someone after an ancestor is a really great way to venerate them. Maybe even giving them a middle name based on someone. And this is a recommendation I've given to people in the past that want to honor friends that have passed. Name your child after your friend, or give them a middle name after your friend. And that way they can carry that on. For example, my middle name is Anthony. Why? And I asked my mom this, why? Why is my middle name Anthony? Mark Anthony, why? I don't know. I thought it looked cool, was her response. Like, no. So let's make our names a little bit more sacred again, because our names used to carry a lot of meaning based on who we were from, who we were named after, you know, what great hero we were named after in our family. So, you know, I really want to petition to make our names cool and sacred again. So what I really want to leave you with here in the end of this video is, if you do want to take that next big step, again, I think talking about our ancestors is a really great way to venerate them and honor them, especially for people who may not be fully committed to the pagan path. But if you are wanting to go down that rabbit hole a little bit and you want to become more connected with them in a pagan way, this is where you start building ancestral altars. I recommend getting a picture of that ancestor, maybe leaving little offerings of candles or incense, or just decorating it and having a nice little sacred space on your altar or your bookshelf, which again, in some places is not wholly a pagan practice. I mean, this is something we see globally, is still the honoring and venerating of ancestors through pictures, and you know, and displaying them in a very festive, spiritual way. But again, you know, actually sitting down at the altar space and communicating with them, sharing your memories, sharing thoughts, sharing fears, and talking to the ancestors that are no longer with us, is a really great way to dive deeper into that connection.
Thank you all for being here. This being our last day here in this house, this has been one of my most favorite gatherings so far. And I thank all of you here for being here. With this, we still have more ahead, but for right now, with this feast, I would like to include the spirits of our ancestors. I want us to honor it, especially for those who've never really delved into this aspect of the practice before. So with this, we give this food, these strong drinks, to our ancestors. And as we eat, I want each person to think of the ancestor they wish to honor and to give a good, happy, somewhat brief story. And I hope this encourages people to dive into this aspect of our faith going forward. Spirits of the ancestors, I call to you. In the name of Hel, in the name of Odin, in the name of Freya, in the name of those whose halls you may dwell, I invite you here. The blood of your blood, the bone of your bone, the flesh of your flesh are here to offer to you, to honor to you. Come and join us this evening.
I'd also like to recommend, if you're wanting to connect more with your ancestors, which is something I've been sharing with you throughout this video, is actually visit sites that your ancestors went to. I know it was big for me, even though they were mostly Christian ancestors, heading down to Eastern Kentucky to the old family graveyard, where a large majority of my past ancestors have been buried, was important for me. So even if they're not pagan, I do recommend taking that journey. And I do know that my ancestors in particular do come from Germany, at least a large chunk of them from one side of my family. But I have family that have come from all around the world, definitely British, hopefully Scandinavian, I hope so. I've never taken a DNA test, and of course, you know, just all around Europe. And so actually going back to Europe and going to Germany and seeing the land that my ancestors once walked on hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, that was really cool. And just feeling that very rooted connection to that. And that's one of the reasons I think paganism is growing in popularity globally, not just Norse paganism, but all forms. And it's because I think we're seeking deeper connections to those who came before us, those who have left our lives that we once knew, and even the people that we never knew that we can still form some form of connection with. So I hope this video has given you a nice place to start as far as ancestral veneration, understanding that it's a very simple concept, but also a very human concept. So get out there, we all have ancestors, let us honor them, let us remember their memories, and let us teach our children about those who came before, and so that we can have a better generation learning from our heroes and our villains throughout all of our lives. And if we don't do that, we should fear the lives that we will live when our generations are all raised by the internet, TikTok, and viral videos. With that, thank you so very much for joining me for this video, and until the hall, Skål.